Hi, I'm Meshal Malik and you're watching Indus Special. Food and its production have always been central to the evolution of societies. But what is essential for survival is also being wasted. According to official figures, roughly one-third of the food produced over the world for human consumption is wasted every year. While this happens, the UN estimates that 1 in 9 people in the world remain hungry. On today's show, we discuss what lies behind this imbalance of demand and supply in our food system, and how the food system at large is changing, and what we need to do to move towards a more sustainable way of food production and food consumption. Joining us for this discussion today is Ms. Reem, who's the regional spokesperson for World Food Program. She joins us from Cairo. Also joining us today is Roshaan, who's a marketing expert, joining us from Lahore. Thank you both for joining us and welcome to the show. Ms. Nada, let me begin with you. Now, the UN states, and I'm quoting here, essentially, current food systems are failing us in terms of livelihoods, human health, and the environment. What do you think this means?
Well, it basically means what you just said now, that 1 in 9 people are hungry today at a time when the world is actually producing food that is enough for everyone. It's threefold the needs of the world, but food is being wasted along the supply chain. So either it's being wasted while it still have not been harvested yet, it's being wasted or lost in transportation, after transportation by us as consumers. So the World Food Program recently launched, during the time we celebrated World Food Day, we launched a campaign for reducing food waste, whether it's food loss or food waste that is done on a personal level. So we advocated for our followers, for our influencers, for our goodwill ambassadors to show how they personally are reducing food waste on a personal level. And this is very important. This is a very important message that the World Food Program is trying to send to the world, which is there is enough food. We just need to be using it better, distributing it better. And also the World Food Program is helping people in developing markets, smallholder farmers and small businesses to reduce food losses along the supply chain line. So, for example, we see in countries that poorer farmers, they lose the food because they don't have the means to markets, they can't reach the markets, or they don't have proper means for storing the food properly, and it gets infested. So we're also helping smallholder farmers in many markets, especially in countries that are susceptible to climate change, to store their food in a better manner, in a more effective fashion, to reduce the losses and also to gain more economic value on the harvest, and they themselves become food secure.
Right. Now, Ms. Nada, you stated here that, of course, there are a number of reasons why we're seeing food wastage. But one point I do want to go back to is hunger. Now, the United Nations has also stated that after years and decades of progress, in order to trying to tackle hunger, in trying to mitigate hunger, it is slowly increasing once again. The numbers are rising once again. What do you think is the reason behind the numbers rising after the trend almost seemed to have been reversed?
This is true. Unfortunately, over the past 3 years, we have been seeing a regression. And as we're approaching towards 2030, where we have set a very ambitious goal, which is reducing hunger, reaching zero hunger as part of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that many countries have signed on to, including Pakistan, we're seeing a regression. The main 2 reasons for this regression are conflict, which we see rampant in our region and in Asia, in the Middle East and in Asia, that is affecting food availability and people's access to food, being economically, or they don't have the means to to buy that food because of economic hardship resulting as a result of conflict, or because of climate change. Climate change being the second main reason for hunger and food inavailability across the world. And we're seeing recently in Zimbabwe, for example, there's a big threat because of a coming drought that is threatening 1 million people in the country, have displaced 1 million people in the country, and the World Food Programme is increasing its assistance in the country to 4 million people. So these numbers are shocking. We are helping, for example, in Yemen, 12 million people with monthly food assistance. 12 million people, because of conflict, are not getting the food they need because they don't have the money to buy it. So these reasons are the two biggest reasons for hunger. Whereas we can advocate for political solutions for conflict and whatnot, remains climate change, which we need to be dealing with its effects and mitigating its effects on the poor, especially,
Right.
as I said, smallholder farmers who do not have really the means to overcome the
Right.
challenges posed by climate change.
Right. And Ms. Nada, I do want to turn back to this point about how we can mitigate the impacts of climate change, especially on food production. But before that, I want to jump to Mr. Ali and talk to him about nutrition and processed foods and how these are marketed. Now, Mr. Ali, when we talk about undernourishment, there's also something to be taken into account, which is how processed foods are becoming less rich in nutrients. Now, we see them all over the television. We see them all over in newspapers. How has the marketing of these products increased in recent years?
When we are actually doing some branding for these products, the main problem is these processed foods actually contain artificial ingredients. And these artificial ingredients are actually not food. They are chemicals, and they are very harmful for our future generation. And they have low in nutrition, low in fiber. So people are going to have a lot of, they are going to become the addict of junk foods. That's the main issue right now. And these processed food, which we are actually marketing or labeling, one of the case study you have right now that in Pakistan, tomato prices are going higher, whereas tomato ketchup and these kind of products, they don't raise their prices. So that means they are not actually using actual pulp or actual food. They are using artificial ingredients, and I think it also requires less energy to digest, and
Right.
we are not.
Ali, let me ask you this. Now, of the key point here is that the pricing of processed foods is such that people move towards them. Now, how is this actually marketed? How is this point capitalized on when you're, whether it's ads or whether it's billboards? How is this marketed to an audience that, here, processed food is cheaper, it's readily more accessible, go for it instead of organic food?
Well, of course, they are, as I told you, that they are most of the brands, they are using artificial or processed food. They are much cheaper. And when we are even in the supermarket, whenever you go, the organic fruits and vegetables, they are much higher in price than our pesticides or other related fruits and vegetables. So when we are lots of brands, they are marketing, they are going to, use low quality or artificial ingredients in their products, and they attract the people, they attract the children by making very colorful and very good campaigns. Even our celebrities, they are endorsing these kind of products, which is very not fine with us.
Right,
because,
and how do they campaign it to make it seem more attractive? Now, we're seeing research after research coming and telling us that our modern day health problems are more and more related to the food we're eating. And yet we don't see any of these trends abating in terms of the consumption of processed foods being reduced. In fact, we're seeing fast food chain after fast food chain emerge, more frozen foods coming into the market. Now, the marketing aspect, which takes in celebrities, which takes in personalities, how does that impact in terms of the demand for these products?
Yeah, obviously, whatever you are going to invest in advertising, the more you advertise, obviously, every company is going to have a return on its investment, which is advertising. So the more buzz they create with these kind of products, they will get a response. And as you say about the junk food, fast food restaurants, people are so much in hurry. They'll go to the restaurants, they order it, within no time they'll get the food and they'll go
Right.
to office and to,
Right.
we are so much influenced by these brands that even we have to feed our children these fast food by just giving a toy.
Stay with me. I want to jump back to Ms. Nada and talk to her about how these big corporations that are producing processed foods are in fact taking a hold of the market. Now, what is the impact of this in terms of those agriculturalists, those farmers who do produce good food but don't get enough returns, and then their livelihoods are impacted?
Well, the biggest problem for farmers is their access to markets. So what makes food more expensive is what we talked about before, which are the losses and the cost of transportation, which they cannot afford. So what the World Food Programme is doing, which is connecting the poorest and most vulnerable and smallest farmers to markets by actually making sort of agricultural co-ops, helping them come together, helping them economically by inputs, agricultural inputs, it makes their lives a lot easier. It helps them economically, it reduces losses and gives them return on their investment or on their agricultural harvest, which is very important for them because sometimes these smallholder farmers, they lose their harvest, they have nothing to eat and they have nothing to sell, which is a big problem. Another thing is that the cost of food. So if food is expensive, if nutritious food is expensive because of many factors, because of climate change, because that results in food loss, because of transportation, that results in food loss, food, of course, ultimately is going to become more expensive. So if we're smarter with the way we treat food, if we're smarter with preserving the harvest, of not having a lot of losses, this will result in more affordable prices for the poorest, especially, who can consume fresh, affordable foods. Another thing is that their intake of micronutrients and how we make this accessible to the poorest in many countries through actually government interventions, because the World Food Programme is in partnership with the government of Pakistan towards its 2025 vision. The World Food Programme has actually helped fortify wheat in 11 provinces in Pakistan, in reaching nearly 3 million people, 2.6 million people in Pakistan now have access to fortified and enriched wheat flour, which is really important for children, for mothers, especially, to break this cycle of hunger and malnutrition, because not only that we see hunger that is visible in our eyes, we see hidden as well. So 50% of children in Pakistan, for example, are stunted because they're not getting enough nutrients, because unnutritious food, unfortunately, as Mr. Ali has said, is a lot less expensive and accessible.
Right. Now, of course, in all, we're talking about food and it lacking the nutrition. But Ms. Nada, I want to go back to a point regarding climate change that you had made earlier, why food insecurity is increasing across the world because of climate change. Now, there's also another thing linked to climate change, which is the way we produce our food and the carbon footprint it has, leading to climate change. And then, of course, climate change reducing the production of food. It seems like a vicious cycle. But on that first point of how the carbon footprint of food is leading to climate change, what eating habits, what production habits need to change?
I think we have to eat from what we produce. And that's why as we progress, as the world develops, the carbon footprint increases. It's all because of development. It's all because of modern age. And if we go back to how we used to live before, if we go back to actually eating from what we grow and valuing this and preserving that, we are not going to see First, we're not going to see a carbon footprint, and we're going to actually work on dealing with climate change. We have done enough damage. So it's time for us to actually deal with the damage as we improve what we have done to the earth. So one of the ways to do that is actually helping people grow better food, helping people deal with climate change and what has happened to their ways of agriculture, because a lot of people that we work with, they are used to growing food in certain ways that are not really appropriate now that they see the effects of climate change on the way they had been growing food, on the way they had been storing food. So actually by helping them deal with these changes, by giving them which we do, by giving them seeds that are more resistant to that are less climate sensitive, we are actually increasing their produce. We are also giving them ways to store their food better, so we're reducing food losses, and we're helping them reach their markets. So they're not going to have to actually import food, because many countries, instead of being food producing countries, they were before, now they are food importing countries. They are heavily depending on food imports because they cannot produce food anymore. So this is the cycle that we have to break, and we are working on breaking that.
Right. And Ms. Nada, just a last one to you. Now, I mentioned this earlier as well, how the food that is being produced, the food system is also impacting our livelihoods. You mentioned how farmers are being adversely impacted by climate change. You mentioned a number of factors, the losses and why that squeezes the margin for farmers to produce more. But I do want to talk a little about that last point you mentioned, which is trade. Now, globally, is the food system also adversely impacting trade between countries?
For example, in Sudan, where Sudan could be a supplier of food. Instead, we see that they actually have food shortages. It's because of the way they are still storing their food. They lose a lot of food in storage. They lose a lot of food in actually because of climate change. We have seen in recent years El Nino and its effect on climate in many countries in the world, especially in Africa, and what this resulted in terms of food losses and hunger. So hunger is basically correlated, as I said, with conflict and climate change. So these countries that have actually been suffering from conflict and suffering from climate change, it's a double burden for many countries. They have suffered from both. So it's time for us to help the poorest and food producers to actually produce more food. This is key in securing food for the entire country and neighboring country, in ensuring that markets are functioning and working in these countries, so there is trade. Even the World Food Program tries to purchase food locally in local markets to actually boost local markets, encourage smallholder farmers and small food producers in terms of dairy.
Ms. Nada, since we're short on time, I take it there how there needs to be a strengthening of those people who are most vulnerable to this. On that point, I do want to ask Mr. Ali a last question. How can marketing play a positive role in spreading awareness regarding all the problems we've basically listed out in this show today, whether it's awareness to those who are producing food, especially farmers who don't have enough knowledge, or about wastage food in terms of telling the public what to do and what not to do?
Well, globally, we see a lot of campaigns on our internet that international countries, they are making campaigns to aware the people that how we can save, how we can save these food shortages or these problems. So I think advertising plays an important role to educate people about whether they should go for processed food or organic food. And I think we should have training programs in our schools to educate people, to children, that what kind of food they are taking in daily routines. And advertising obviously play an important role. We should have a major campaign by the government or also from the international brands that they should allow children to know that's their right. So they should know about what kind of food they should have. And
Right.
I think I'm listening to Ms. Nada, and she's correct about one point, that even our farmers, they don't know how to save the food and should have a good, proper access to the markets.
Right.
If we can supply a good food by, taking some actions for, food problems that, for example, if somebody from the farmer side is going to,
Right.
transfer the
It will obviously have
fruits
better
and
implications in the future if we try to educate, if we try to spread awareness. And Mr. Ali, thank you so much for highlighting how advertisement and marketing can play a positive role in doing that. On that point, I'd like to thank Reem Nada for joining us from Cairo and Mr. Roshaan Ali for joining us from Lahore. We're going to go for a short break. When we return, we're going to have another topic for you. Stay with us. Welcome back to the show. Eating disorders are life-threatening. But what environmental factors lead to people becoming victims of them? And what can be done to reset an individual's unhealthy relationship with food? We discussed this in detail. Joining us for this discussion is Adnan Farooq, who's a fitness consultant, joining us here from Lahore. Also joining us is Aleksandra Djuric, who's a psychologist, joining us from Serbia. Thank you both for joining us and welcome to the show. Adnan, let me start off with you. Now, how essential is this link of a person having a healthy relationship with food? I mean, we're seeing a number of cases in which people are developing eating disorders. But what does a healthy relationship with food mean, and how can a person move towards it?
I think as far as the relationship with food goes, I think it is, I believe, at the heart of human existence, so to speak. I mean, we are, in our modern day, we are pressed for time. We need to have, optimized energy. We need to perform our best. Even stuff like sleep and physical fitness, it all comes down to nutrition. So when we talk to our clients, and we, generally when we're talking to people, we say that nutrition absolutely is a game changer. So if you can fix that, a lot of stuff that you're encountering, maybe health issues or psychological or even physical ailments, a lot can be cured with your, once you adopt a healthy eating lifestyle.
Right. Aleksandra, let me jump to you. When we talk about eating disorders and the environmental factors, meaning what happens in our daily lives, what we see in the media, in magazines, how does that impact a person's psyche and potentially lead to an eating disorder?
Yes, I would like to emphasize that the modern concept of beauty is a terror or of perfection. So when young girls have that kind of social model, it can be very very, very dangerous. Young girls these days must have different kinds of role model in family, school, society generally, of course. Not only to emphasize that not only what outside is important, but what is inside is also a part of our identity.
Now, in all of this, what role do coping skills play when we're talking about negative experiences, people being able to deal with them, and that leading to something such as an eating disorder?
Yes, we must understand that family have a great impact on a young child. So they must, from young age, they must be able to have a healthy role model in family. So when connection to food is, when we are talking to food, there is a primarily connection in family and emotion towards family. So if child has a good role model in family, it shouldn't be so dangerous when they look outside some role models.
Right. Adnan, to this point of seeing role models, to this point of seeing models in general, different types of body images being plastered over the media, how do you as a fitness consultant give advice to clients who come aspire towards a certain body which might not be similar to their own?
I think the first thing we say to them that even the girl in the magazine doesn't look like the girl in the magazine. If you look at her, I mean, in normal day, so it's important that we stop looking at, trying to look perfect in the society and learning to accept ourselves. I think that's really, really important because in today's day and age, we're all trying to be perfect, and that is more so on the superficial side, so to speak. So I think when we learn to accept ourselves and we do that from a place of positivity, whatever practices or whatever endeavors, whatever initiatives for weight loss and health we will take forward will be positive. I think the basic issue is when people try to lose weight, they are doing so from a place of negativity. They hate their images. They want to get out of it as soon as possible. And unfortunately, the actions that they take, they are mostly leading to deteriorating health. I mean, I get to hear that all the time, that people will want to lose weight and they're even willing to forego or ignore things like hair fall. I mean, it's really, really upsetting, when you hear people say that, what, I can do away with lesser hair, but I need to really cut back and I need to lose whatever weight that they want to lose. So it's coming out of a place of desperation. It's coming out of a place of negativity, and that needs to be, sorted.
Right. Aleksandra, now Adnan stated here that negativity, of course, leads to these problems that we're talking about. Now, when we're talking about this negative energy, we're talking about nutrition. What impact does good nutrition have on a person's psyche, on their mental health, not just their physical?
Yes, I must say, and we must know that weight loss and eating disorders is not only a mental, but it is profound emotional problem. So we must, as a psychotherapist, I must understand the emotional motivation for, I must say, eating disorders. So I work through psychotherapy. They must accept that it is okay not to be perfect. No one is perfect. That images that we see in the media, that is very negative, because those people are not perfect. Pictures are photoshopped. That is generally a very bad image for personality and identity. So they must learn that no one is perfect and that it's okay not to be perfect. Food is not perfect. perfect. Some days we are going to eat something that is not so healthy. The other day we eat something healthy. A balance is what is important, not terror of perfection, that we must be like robots and that we must every day took some schedule. It is okay sometimes to have a piece of chocolate or cookie if that person wants. But in general, we must understand that good nutrition is just a part of our life, nothing else.
Now, Aleksandra, as we've been talking about eating disorders, there's also binge eating. There's also something that leads to obesity. Are the underlying emotional reasons for that the same as those for something such as anorexia?
Yes, that is a very, I must say, complex problem because there is something that is called emotional overeating. When we don't know how to cope with our trauma, early age trauma, or some big emotional problem or depression, we can have a food addiction. So that kind of behavior can help us to cope with some things that we can cope in reality. So psychotherapy is really needed in that case.
Right. And now, Adnan, in a person's goals, how important is it to have a balanced meal plan? And by that, I mean regular meals as well as nutritious meals. How does that lead to having a better fitness, a better body? Take us through that process.
I'd like to, the relationship between food and health is so profound that, 80% of the serotonin, which is actually the feel-good hormone, which is produced in the brain, 80% of that production happens to be in the gut area. That's where the food is absorbed. So if there is some kind of inflammation, so to speak, in the gut area, we have reduced production of serotonin, hence we have, incidents of depression, maybe not chronic, but there you'll have bouts of depression. So it's important. I mean, you can see the link between food and overall health and fitness. Now, what I think needs to be underlined, I think what needs to be understood across the board is that you have fitness goals and you have weight loss goals on one side and you have nutrition on the other side. So one has to move away from the dieting mentality, so to speak, which is really cutting back on food, having that fear of food. I get a lot of people and they have this, they have convinced themselves over the years that, food is our enemy. And, one of the ways I try to, sort of fix that is that, there is so much a variety of food. If food were bad for us, then why are we, why is there so much variety in the first place? So nutritional deficiencies, and then you have deteriorating health. So what one needs to do is, and what I do for most of my clients is we will look at all the macros, the carbohydrates, the proteins, and the fats. And without going into a lot of detail, one has to have a balance of everything. One has to, you have to not be drastic with your goals that, you get to hear people saying, I want to lose 10 kilos, something like as ridiculous as 10 kilos in a month, which is way too much. And then because that's their goal, then they will cut back on food. They'll have too less calories, and that is going to affect their metabolism, their mental health, their physical health. They'll get weaker in the process.
Right. Aleksandra, we've been talking about body and the link it has to good nutrition. Now, an experiment by Instagram was to hide the likes on pictures in order to reduce people being so conscious about how they look and actually focusing on the content. This is just one instance, but I do want to focus on how social media in this age has played a role in people becoming increasingly insecure or even more secure about their body image. It goes both ways.
Yes, of course. Social media, like media in general, they create so-called social role models. So in that part, it can be dangerous when we have girls like models, for instance, that they are perfect, their skin is perfect, their hair is perfect, their body is perfect. So of course that young girls who are not perfect, that they can feel insecure. But social media can have impact, but I must say that family and generally society like school can have a bigger role model than social media. If family is healthy, if family have a good emotional balance and contact with the child, I think that social media cannot be blamed for eating disorder.
Right. And not to deviate from the point of social media, I'm going to jump to Adnan in a bit and talk to him about that. But since, Aleksandra, you mentioned the role of family in this, I do want to talk about how important it is to be aware of the red flags of when a family member or a friend is going through an eating disorder. What are the red flags and what kind of intervention at that point is required?
Yes, young girls, even boys, of course, but it's more often that girls have eating disorders in puberty, in time when they are going through teenage phases. It's very common, so they experiment with food and that they want to be more perfect. So when they start to behave passive, they don't leave the room, when they skip meals, when they don't want to eat regularly, when they try to cut everything like sugar and the white flour, it can be a red flag that something is going on, especially when they are passive and when they don't want to talk with their parents. So that is a red flag that we must talk with our child. We must get emotional connected with our child. We must understand that that phase, teenage phase, it's very difficult for them. So we must be with them, not only work, and we must talk to our child.
Right. And I want to go back to that point of social media now. There is a lot of talk about fitness online, and there are a lot of fitness influencers out there. Do you feel like this change is for the good, or does it have any cons that come with it?
I think everything has a good side and a bad side. Personally, I believe that it's how, I mean, the way most of us, the way how vulnerable we've become. I think it's more of the unfortunately, it's the negative side that is impacting us. We see people, putting up their images of, trying to look, a certain way, and they will project a certain part, or depict a certain part of their lives, and trying to show that everything is, hunky-dory, everything's fine, and that has an impact absolutely on people, and one of the ways, surprisingly, is when we talk to our clients, we will tell them to sort of use less of social media if that can make sense, because the more they look at people, especially in a time like this, when New Year's coming up and everybody's all psyched up for, this is a festive season for everybody, and they see, everybody getting in shape, and sometimes those practices, in fact, most of the times I would say they're not healthy practices, the way people have lost weight, and it has an impact. So people would be going fine, they'll be adopting lifestyle, a healthy lifestyle, they'll be going gradual, but as soon as they see somebody dropping drastic amount of weight, they'll get into a spiral, and that's where we have to intervene. We have to tell them that, what, you can't judge a book by its cover. You can't see what's happening in the background.
Right.
And you can certainly not see if they've lost weight drastically, they're surely going to gain it back. So these are the things that, unfortunately, social media is, that's where we need to be a little mindful.
Right, and those are a number of interesting to state there, how sometimes in your weight loss journey or in your fitness journey, whether you're wanting to gain weight or lose weight, social media might not play the most positive role. On that point, thank you so much, Adnan Farooq, for joining us from Lahore, and Aleksandra Djuric for joining us from Serbia. Thank you for watching Indus Special. We will see you again next time with more stories. Till then, goodbye and take care.